I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story, where I consult, teach, coach, and speak on the applied science and bewitchery of brand and business storytelling so that you can clarify your story to amplify your impact and simplify your life.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
Two weeks ago, I was buying a pair of smart-looking Barlow cap toe black dress shoes from Johnston and Murphy over at the Scottsdale Fashion Square. I needed some new kicks for a keynote presentation at a sales kickoff event I was doing in DC for a large software company. Well, when I was in there, I noticed a pair of these dark blue, beautiful wingtips, and they were on sale. These were the exact same shoes I had purchased at Johnston and Murphy's in Chicago about 6 months earlier. And now they were like $40 less than what I had paid for them. So I just happened to mention to the lady that was helping me that I had bought those shoes in Chicago, and wow, here's, they're $40 off, and the new pair that I was buying were full price. But I just kind of mentioned that I didn't think anything would really come of it. Well, when we found my new shoes and I went to pay for them, she knocked off the $40. She gave me the sales price on those just as if, I was buying the blue shoes because I had bought them before, and I didn't even have any proof that I bought them. It could have just been a story I concocted. But without asking, she was empowered to be able to give me that break. Well, that is customer service that I got to tell you is going to immediately build me and my customer loyalty for Johnston. It has created tremendous free word of mouth marketing because I'm telling you about the Johnston and Murphy story right now. And who do you think I'm going to go to the next time I need a pair of shoes? Even if I buy them online or at Zappos, I'm going to shop Johnston and Murphy first. They now have my loyalty, and I have a great story about their brand that I happily share. And it only costed them $40. Customer loyalty. Are there different kinds of it, and how do you build it through your brand story? Well, today, just for you, we have an expert here to explore the power of a shared brand narrative in building customer loyalty. Barry Kirk is the VP of Strategy at Maritz Loyalty, a consultancy that uses behavioral and decision sciences to build customer loyalty for their clients. And Barry has a multi-loyalty framework that you can use to create ritual use of your offering by your customers. You'll learn, among other things, how loyalty and a brand narrative grounded in values go hand in hand. Why loyalty is a quote-unquote story with more than one ending. Ritz's multi-loyalty framework, we're going to go through this, and it has these various kinds of customer loyalty, including inertia loyalty. I mean, what in the heck is inertia loyalty? How about mercenary loyalty? True loyalty, cult loyalty. And he even mentioned something to me that I'm kind of curious to explore, is why tiki bars are the ultimate expression of storytelling in business. So let's get after it right now. Barry Kirk, welcome to the Business of Story.
Thank you, Park. I'm really happy to be here with you today.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun because, in 186 some episodes, the one thing I've not covered much is customer loyalty, and especially how it works with, building customer loyalty through a shared brand narrative and your storytelling. Now, there are a lot of businesses, a lot of different jobs in the branding world. How did you find yourself involved in customer loyalty?
Well, I arrived at it to a pretty circuitous route, I have to say. It wasn't a direct path like from college straight into loyalty marketing because, it doesn't surprise me that you haven't covered it in that many episodes simply because it is a pretty niche part of the marketing space, even though the average consumer is in something like 25 or 30 loyalty programs. It still remains sort of a niche part of the industry. I guess I would say my own personal narrative goes back to my origin story, which was I was born the son of a preacher man. My father was a pastor. My grandfather was one. I came from a family of 10 siblings, and an older brother and my twin brother all went into the ministry as well. I was the one that I think everybody thought was going to go into the ministry and didn't.
You were the prodigal son. You were the one that went out and partied and raised hell and spent your family's fortune and then came back. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty close. Close enough without me revealing too many details.
Fair enough.
But I did realize, though, that I had the skills that would have been applicable in that career. And so I decided, well, what else could I apply that to? And it took me a bit of my career to figure out where to best do that. I spent a fair amount of time dabbling in theater, and I really enjoyed that. And the way you sort of create an experience, I think, was a good use of that. But it doesn't pay a lot. I spent a fair amount of my career in the IT space when the web really took off and became a thing. And that for me was a focus mostly on how do you create a great experience. And I got very much into usability and user experience design. When I was in the middle of that IT career, at one point, a mentor of mine called me up one day, literally, I think over a Christmas holiday. And she said, "Hey, I want to suggest something to you." She goes, "I think you're in the wrong career. You don't belong in the world of IT. And I think I have the career for you. And it's in something called loyalty marketing."
And what do you think she saw in you that said you should be in loyalty marketing?
I think she saw that I had this strong communication skills. I was also somebody who was really able to create a passionate advocacy around certain ideas, and also to take fairly complex concepts and make them simple and understandable, which were, the skills that I saw emulated in various family members as I grew up. And, I think she was suggesting to me that this career in loyalty marketing, which is really about creating passionate advocates of brand experiences, was a much better place to channel those skills. And so essentially in the middle of my career, I rebooted everything. I started literally over again, walked away from a great job where I had a lot of direct reports and a lot of authority into basically starting over again. And it was a very scary thing to do. But that also is what told me it was the right thing to do. Like, it was the right thing to do something that was causing me to really have to work hard and learn again in the middle of my career.
Isn't that always the way it is? I mean, you get a herald, literally in Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, she acted as your herald and says, "You know what, mid-career, you should really be doing something else." And you're like, "What the heck?" And then you say, "Okay, maybe I should do this." But you're right, it is scary when you're actually, carve out your own path and go out and do what you want to do it. What is interesting to me about your backstory, just what little you've told me so far, is this idea of this combination or intersection at the intersection of passionate advocacy and making technical things simple for people to understand. If you look at your theater and your IT background, those are those two worlds. You've got an emotional right brain world with the theater, and you've got this logical left brain world with the IT. And it only makes sense that you would bring those two together for customer loyalty.
Yeah, it's critical. And if I have any criticism of the peers I acquired over the years in marketing, is I think they tend to fall too much on the logical sort of data-driven side too often. I know from having listened to many episodes of this podcast that you highlight the people who definitely have a sense of the emotion being so critical to how you create connection. And so I found that the easiest place, though, really to bring that in is loyalty marketing, because when you talk about the word loyalty, that is an emotion-laden term. It's impossible not to bring that emotional human story side into it if you're going to be good at it.
So define loyalty marketing for us. I think, like a lot of things, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. How do you define it?
Well, for a long time in my career, the standard definition I would have given to someone is resistance to the competitive offer. So I shop with this brand. I buy, in your case, I buy shoes here, or I buy my coffee here. And even if somebody puts a different offer in front of me, I'm going to resist that offer, even if it frankly is a more financially advantageous offer.
So you're inoculating people, brands, from losing customers to a more attractive offer because of the loyalty, which is based on emotion, I got to believe.
Yeah, and that's the core of it. Although a fair amount of it is emotion, but a lot of it also has just been, pure rational sort of greed in it to it as well. To say essentially, if you stay with us, we'll pay you to be our customer. I have certainly over the last few years evolved my sense, though, of that definition. I don't think that idea of resisting a competitive offer is good enough. I think it probably was good enough in the 80s when loyalty programs were first introduced. Today, we tend to think of it more as an insistence on a brand, an insistence on a particular brand experience, where literally you're telling people, yeah, we can't go there because that's not where I go. I go to this other place and this other brand. That's way more powerful a construct than saying, well, when somebody puts an offer in front of them, they'll weigh it, but they'll probably resist it. What you really want is the person who says, I really don't even know that other coffee companies exist. I only go to Starbucks, right? That's what you want.
Well, the ubiquity of them helps too. You got them on every corner, so they're pretty.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah.
Take us to a customer, a client you have, and you can save the name to protect the innocent if you like. But take us to a loyalty program you've seen that has worked really well.
The strongest loyalty programs, interestingly, tend to be with the smallest businesses. And the reason I think that is because they're able to actually create that personal connection without having to worry about whether that scales or not. And I want to use an example that isn't a client, but I want to just use it as an example of where that has worked really well. I joined lots of things to test out the experience. And one of those that I joined here where I live in St. Louis was a restaurant called Blood and Sand.
Delicious.
Yeah, exactly. So it's Blood and Sand is actually a reference to a famous cocktail from the 30s, but you're going to need to, it's a bit of insider knowledge you need to know to even, connect to that restaurant.
With a name like Blood and Sand, it's got to be good.
It's got to be good. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was a cocktail focused restaurant, but it was a membership restaurant, which was a very new idea here in St. Louis. And the idea was that you paid a nominal fee, you became a member, and then you got to actually have then the access to go and pay them more money to eat food at their restaurant.
Brilliant.
But the system they put in place, though, was not just this membership idea, but that the two owners were always at the restaurant and they personally got to know everybody who came in. And so over time, any of their members, they would come to your table and they would talk to you by name. And they would sometimes bring you free food because they wanted you to try something new and they would remember something you had said from the last time. And they would make special allowances if you had a different party that came in. It was, for me, it was an amazing example at a local scale of what loyalty is really about. It's not that you had the best price or even the best product. It's that you had the most compelling experience. Because really the growth of that restaurant for years was that other people would say, oh my God, you gotta go to this place. But by the way, you really can't go because you're not a member. But guess what? I can get you in because I'm a member. So all kinds of psychology at play.
Well, all great stories that come out of that too.
Absolutely. Of like the food you tried or how you got access. But the problem with that kind of an example is it's very hard to scale that. So we tend to work with larger brands through Maritz where we're actually trying to help them determine how to do that. One of our clients that I'm happy to talk about is Southwest Airlines, and I think they do a fantastic job of being a personal brand. Now, they can't treat you like they know you on the flight, but they do treat you like a human being. They have sort of a goofy approach sometimes to how they interact with the customers on a flight.
They totally disrupt the customer experience in travel.
Absolutely, they give them sort of carte blanche as the flight attendants to do those funny safety messages at the beginning where they sometimes sing or it's full of jokes that if you're not paying attention, all of a sudden you're paying attention. And I think they do a lot with their other communications too, but they give their employees, and I think this goes back to your opening story, they give their employees the opportunity to be human and real with customers and to do it in the way that works for them, not we're going to script a funny way to do safety and then everybody does the same safety, funny script, right? That's not how they do it. They basically say, if you want to do one, do your own thing and be funny and make that work. And I think that's what we're really talking about when we say loyalty is how effectively do these larger brands bring a human element into that experience?
Well, and that's what struck me at Johnston and Murphy. I go back, I was just kind of blown away because here I am at Scottsdale Fashion Square, which I was told once upon a time, it's a huge mall here in Scottsdale, that it is the most profitable mall in the country. And I believe it because there's a lot of people blowing through there and they have a lot of high-end stores. And it's kind of impersonal when you're in there. They try to warm it up for you, whatever. So my wife, Michelle, and I just went in to get these shoes. I needed a new pair. I wasn't even thinking about it. And I saw the blue Oxfords I have that all kinds of people comment on. They just love those shoes. And then when I saw that, they were on sale, I just mentioned, I wasn't even going for the freebie. I just said, oh man, I just got those in Chicago. Funny thing, was out there on a speaking gig, forgot my shoes at home, and I had to run down to Michigan Avenue and found them, at your store there. And the lady, just without even thinking about it, gave me that discount on these. She didn't even really mention it. It just kind of happened. And I was really blown away by that, Barry. And it occurred to me, man, now there is loyalty right there that I'm going to absolutely come back and, buy more shoes from them because of that effort. But she had the agency to do it. She didn't have to call somebody in or call in a manager. Who knows? Maybe she was a manager. I'm not sure. But it really blew me away because it's just kind of customer service. You just don't come across that often anymore.
Yeah, and that's a great example of what we refer to in our practice as something that has selfie value. That moment had selfie value.
I love that. So because now we're out talking about it.
Exactly. And so if you have an experience that just did make you happy, but you thought, I can't resist sharing this with other human beings. It could literally mean you post it, on Facebook or something.
Or talk about it on my podcast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Selfie value is simply the idea that I had an experience with a brand that was so unique or unexpected or emotionally connecting that I start to share it with other people. I know we talk about word of mouth marketing, but it is so critical to where loyalty is heading now, evolving away from just strictly points-based programs where it's sort of, you're just paying me to be a customer, into like one of the things we do in our practice is work with our clients to say, where are your selfie value moments in your customer journey? And if you don't have any, if you don't have places where either you're purposely trying to create them, or in your case, you're giving your employees the opportunity to create them themselves, then you're going to have a hard time moving forward and creating, that kind of real connection that loyalty defines.
Well, and Southwest Airlines then, I guess, has a little bit of that selfie value, because if you hear a particularly funny announcement or they take you through the safety procedures and they sing it the whole way through, you have a tendency of talking about that. Here's a quick question without going down a rabbit hole, but since Herb Kelleher just passed away, and you're in the middle, you work with them on their loyalty program. How has Southwest been able to maintain that irreverent, disruptive brand personality, even in the face of Herb Kelleher, retiring, getting out of the middle of the operations, ultimately passing away, and yet it doesn't feel like that brand has lost a step in its core essence?
I'll tell you, if you've ever had an opportunity to visit Southwest's headquarters in Texas, what is powering that. It is an electric feel when you go there, that they absolutely know what their culture is, starting with their employees. And it is a bit of, like, for instance, a lot of people don't know this, but Halloween is like the official holiday at Southwest. And they have Halloween, you sometimes see it at the airports, but at Southwest, and it's a big deal and people are in costume and it's part of their irreverence. But the way they interact inside their corporate headquarters is the exact same way that they interact with their customers. And so they know what their culture is and they live that culture out. And I think they've seen their success in that to make them stand out from the other airlines. I mean, I'm sure people love or like the other airlines, but I don't think they do it in the same sort of human connected way they do with Southwest. And just recently, Southwest announced, absolutely not, we are not doing baggage fees. We know all the other airlines are making a lot of money off baggage fees, and we are holding strong to not doing that. So they know what their narrative is, and they do not move off of it for anything.
Yeah, just booked them last night from here to Phoenix to New Orleans, and I'm looking forward to it because they are a great airline to fly. By the way, I don't know if you've heard Herb Kelleher's interview on How I Built This with Guy Raz on NPR.
I haven't.
It's fantastic. So any of the listeners out there, if you want to get an insight into how Southwest came about, this was a show that Guy, interviewed him about 2 years ago, and it's really excellent on How I Built This. We'll put a link in the show notes. But let's continue on. You've got this multi-loyalty framework. Now, and maybe the selfie loyalty, the selfie value is one of those. Can you take us through this and explain how we can be applying 1, 2, or 3 of these different steps in our own worlds?
Absolutely. And this is a framework that I developed with my colleagues at Maritz in an attempt to help companies think in a little bit more of a sophisticated way about loyalty. There's a tendency to think of customer loyalty as binary. It's either on or off. You're either loyal or you're not loyal. But if you practice in this particular kind of marketing for a while, you begin to realize that's absolutely not true. There are nuances to the kind of loyalty that customers bring to you, or the kind of loyalty that you might be asking for. And you may not even realize it. You may say, well, we just ask customers to be loyal. And my first question is, well, what kind of loyalty are you asking from them? Because that can make all the difference in how successful you are, whether you have the right messages, whether you're telling the right stories to them to match that. So when we work on a new loyalty program, we ask questions at the outset across two dimensions. One is transactional to relational. That's the first dimension. And essentially saying, if you really were being honest with yourself as a brand, are you primarily sort of dealing at the level of price and discount? Is primarily transactional, or is most of the way you communicate with customers around the idea of like, we know you and we're fun and we love you and we want you to have a great experience that's more relational? There's a second continuum then, or dimension, which is passive to active. And that is the question of, what am I asking of that customer? If I'm mostly just asking you to purchase, then that's fairly passive. That's what you would expect anybody to do. But on the other end of that continuum, you could have a more active experience where you're saying, beyond purchase, I really want you to engage. I want you to share something, or to learn something, or master something as part of this experience. And so if you sort of lay those two continuums on top of each other, they create the possibility for four types of loyalty at the intersections. So inertial loyalty is this passive transactional loyalty. And it's the idea of being stuck in the brand experience. It's transactional because it's really just, I want you to make a purchase. And it's passive because I honestly don't want you to think about it very much. I just want you to keep doing that.
Give us an example of that.
So pretty much the entire telecommunications industry is based on inertial loyalty. You sign up for a contract and then you're sort of stuck. And in some cases, I'd say even airlines work in that space. You may say, you may live...
1 minute though, but...
Yeah.
Working with CenturyLink out here, I can tell you it's not passive. It is on the phone all the time. Is why is my internet not working right now? So it's the different kind of loyalty. But
yeah, absolutely. But if, and I'm not saying every brand certainly in that market sits there, but if you can look at your brand and say predominantly we are based on engaged customers, or customers who feel like, well, getting out of this contract is too much effort, then you're probably over-indexing on inertial loyalty. It is a kind of loyalty. But if you're, like for instance, when I started my career in the loyalty industry, we would sit around in rooms and come up with what we called barriers to exit. So if we could come up with really clever ways to make customers feel stuck, we would just, everybody would slap each other on the back and say, let's take that to the client. We came up with another barrier. We don't do that anymore. That's not an interesting path for us anymore.
Yeah, that just to me doesn't seem like loyalty. But I see what you're saying. Loyalty can have a positive and a negative connotation to it. It's like, I guess I'm loyal because I have no choice. I don't want to have to overcome that barrier to get the hell out.
Yeah, but you're right. It isn't loyalty, but because brands tend to use it and call it loyalty, what we've found is we have to start where they are in that process. So we'll say, okay,
brand incarceration.
Exactly. I love that. I'm going to write that down. That's really good. Another really good example in this space, more that probably most people have experienced in the business world at this point, is what Uber did to like the yellow cab companies. The cab companies were mostly working on inertial loyalty. Most people didn't really enjoy the experience of riding in a cab in most cities. And what Uber did was come in and say, okay, what are all those friction points? I'll remove each one of those things that makes that kind of miserable. And then almost overnight, you started to see people begin to shift over, right? So the problem with inertial loyalty is it can work very well until it doesn't. And once it doesn't, it's pretty much gone immediately.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
So if I move over on the model from inertial loyalty, the one adjacent to it that is way more powerful is mercenary loyalty. And we use mercenary not in a pejorative way, it's just a descriptive term. And that's essentially, sometimes we refer to it as the bribe. It's when you pay customers to be loyal. It's still pretty transactional, but this is active now because most of the times this expresses itself as a point system or a miles system that I have to learn and get really good at in order to get the most value out of it. It could be, a discount or a price cut, but in most sense in the loyalty world, we create a little game that you play, which is about earning points and redeeming points and getting bonuses and leveling up through tiers. And that's really been the model since the 1980s, the most dominant model. And we just call it mercenary loyalty because that's essentially what you're saying to your customer is, I will pay you more to stay here so you don't go next door to my competitor unless they pay more. And then you start having people bouncing, back and forth between brands.
Yeah, so those first two, then inertia and the mercenary, do they kind of fall in this idea of binary? I mean, I'm going to pay you or I'm going to make it very difficult. There's not relationships. There's not the depth there like you talked about with blood and sand, where the owners show up and they're hanging with you and they're actually building this relationship. So this feels like it's much more of a commoditized, like if you're in the commodity world, you're probably relying, and price point is everything. You're trying to be, the least expensive, but still try to maintain some kind of margin. So you're living in this inertia and mercenary loyalty world. And do I have that right?
That's exactly it. And they're costly ways of doing loyalty, of retaining customers. You have to invest a significant sum in launching these kinds of programs and maintaining them, in making sure that you're not giving too much away, but you're giving enough to entice customers. And you're constantly in a battle for your competitor maybe offering a penny more. And frankly, though, I will say these programs were very, very effective for decades, and they are still somewhat effective. But all the data that we see is they're effective at a declining rate. Customers have probably become fatigued on them after just decades of saying, I know what a points program is. What else do you have for me?
Well, and what if the mentality of the customer has changed too, like we have seen in the brand world? In 2006, Barry, I really saw our whole paradigm shift in the advertising marketing business, going from the traditional way you go about communicating and enticing customers in to what technology did to create, the masses are the media now. But it also, I think, changed or pivoted the ethos or the relationship with the brand, where customers would start, rising up online and other places and talking about your brand, Yelp and all that. They would give you pros and cons. And it kind of changed the way maybe where brands really controlled the influence of mass media, and they could get away with these inertia and mercenary programs because that's just the way it is, to now a very vocal, empowered customer that says, no, you know what? I demand more. And maybe that then tips the scales over into this relationship type of loyalty, which, by the way, I believe probably takes a heck of a lot more effort than the first two you described.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. The reason, though, I think it takes more effort now, I don't think it's going to take more effort as we develop more and more strategies going in that direction, is that it's not the way marketers who do loyalty work are used to thinking. They're not used to thinking in terms of relationship. Like, it's interesting that when I look at a lot of the companies I've worked with, and frankly, a lot of my peers in the industry, they don't have the background I have. I tend to work on a day-to-day basis with a lot of people with backgrounds in, they have MBAs or in analytics or finance. And that makes sense when basically you were driving loyalty by building little points economies and you had to manage that as sort of its own separate little business. That's the skill set you needed. But when you start thinking about trying to create experience-based loyalty or tribal-based loyalty that's far more emotion-based, you need a different kind of expert with a different kind of skill set. And I think that companies are just now starting to become aware that that's what they're going to need in order to get into these other ways of connecting with customers that are less about control and more about encouraging the customer to be part of the experience and adding their own voice to it.
And you talk about in your background information in Maritz Loyalty about using behavioral and decision sciences. Is this where they really come into play, that you don't need them quite as much in the first two of inertia and mercenary loyalty, but you do need that understanding more in the relationship type of loyalty?
Definitely, although there is an application of behavioral science in mercenary loyalty in these points programs, I would characterize how it has been applied in that type of loyalty strategy for most companies, though, as manipulative use of that knowledge. Essentially, it was sort of ways of convincing customers that something had value or getting them not to do something. When we start talking about these other two types of loyalty that we look at, true loyalty or loyalty driven by the experience, and cult loyalty, the loyalty of the tribe, what you're starting to look at there is how do I apply behavioral science not to manipulate, but to create something that's irresistible, that draws people in and delivers what they're looking for. So just as a quick example, one that we often use in our practice is something out of the work of actually a behavioral economist, Daniel Kahneman, which is something called the peak end rule. And the peak end rule is essentially something that he pulled out of a lot of research he did to understand how people remember experiences that they've had. and relate those experiences back later. And there's a tendency to think that when we have an experience, we're basically taking every moment of that experience and then adding it all up in an aggregate saying it was a good or bad experience or enjoyable or not enjoyable or memorable. But his research has shown that in actuality, we don't do that. We actually forget most of those moments, except for the peaks and the very end. And the peak can be positive or negative, but I remember high points and I remember how something ended, and pretty much everything else I wipe away. His great example of that is going to Disneyland. When you go to Disneyland, most people remember an experience at Disneyland as being great. But if they remembered every moment, they'd remember that 99% of going at Disneyland is standing in line in the hot sun with kids, yelling and being grumpy around you. You don't remember all that. You remember like the best rides, and then you remember the big parade and fireworks at the end. And so one of the things we do in our practice is apply that particular characteristic. So you know what? You might work with a CX team to really optimize your entire customer journey. But from a loyalty standpoint, we actually just want to focus on a handful of moments. Where are your peak moments? It kind of gets back to that selfie value idea is very connected into this. And then how do you end a transaction? What does that look like each time? And frankly, your example with buying shoes is a great example of sort of the peak and the end being the same thing. And that's why that's a powerful story for you, because those two got collapsed together. And that's how we look at it, applying behavioral science to create these experiences that just make it feel like I can't do anything but go back to that same place again because I want to repeat that.
So can you then take us through an example of true loyalty and how this plays into that?
So true loyalty is essentially saying you're here because the experience is so powerful or irresistible that I don't even have to give you the lowest price because it's worth it to pay more to be here. So you can think of a lot of brands that are premium price brands where customers actually know they're spending too much, but they don't care. So for example, Starbucks is one we often talk about in that. Not a client of ours, but a great example of that. I spend personally way too much money at Starbucks. I usually go more than once a day. And I know that cup of coffee is not worth $5. It absolutely
well, and how much of this is addiction versus affection? That's the other question about Starbucks.
Yeah, well,
I do the exact same thing.
You're absolutely right. But I do think there's one place where I know it isn't just about addiction because, Starbucks, and I think oddly, in my mind, added drive-up windows in the last, 5 years or so. And I use the drive-up windows a lot, but I far prefer to go inside to buy my cup of coffee. I want to just spend like 5 minutes in the relaxing environment of the Starbucks store. And, that was the idea that Howard Schultz had with what Starbucks was supposed to be about, was that idea of the third place, that it's the third place between work and home. And so I think that is part of what they played off of. It isn't really about buying, a halfway decent, way too expensive cup of coffee. It's about sort of this refuge that you can go to at some point in your day and feel like you can just take a breath for a minute. And so they don't have to be the cheapest coffee on the market. And in fact, it's the opposite. But because they're using experience to drive loyalty, I think they've been really successful.
Yeah, totally makes sense. While you were talking, I jumped online real quick because I was going back to your Daniel Kahneman reference about those peak moments, and it reminded me of a book I read last year with Dan and Chip Heath. I'm curious if you read that, The Power of Moments.
I have read that. It's a great book.
Yeah, and for you listeners, if you haven't read it, it does cover a lot of the science that Barry's talking about here in very simple, fun ways, has terrific anecdotes and stories in it. But I had forgot about that idea of these peak moments, the peak and the ending, and they cover that on how to design and create these moments, in your stories to entice people in, but also I imagine to use them in loyalty. Have you seen a brand or brands that do a good job that are really focused on those peak moments? Now, we just talked about Starbucks. You come in and you have that 5 minutes of refuge of, I get to slow down for just a second. Is there another one that really, exhibits that idea of, man, I am going to give you a peak moment and a terrific ending that you're not going to soon forget?
Well, I think Nordstrom's, if we talk about a retail brand maybe that does that, they one of the things that they do or have done, I'm not sure if they're still doing, but have done traditionally, is these special holiday shopping events for just their highest tier customers in their loyalty program, where you basically get access to the store when nobody else does as a group. And they make you feel really, really special, and you get access to special merchandise and pricing. But I think really in that case, that's an idea of where they're creating probably several peaks within that evening experience. And then just the way that they greet you at the end of it and make you feel really special. They are essentially also working off that whole idea of like in-group, out-group. Like being part of this experience is something I have because I'm different than other people for whatever reason, which might be I'm different because I just spend way too much at the store. But they make it an experience that you can look forward to. So you're using anticipation. But I only know about this particular part of Nordstrom because I have friends who experience that. I have not been there, but that also tells you that it creates stories that they share later about that.
Yeah, great. Let's move on to then cult loyalty. How is that different than true loyalty, and what is it all about?
Yeah, this is actually my favorite kind of loyalty, and the one I, in my own practice, working with our clients, have spent more time trying to drive brands to embrace. It is the least used kind of loyalty in the market today, but it's essentially the idea. We use the word cult just to sort of be cheeky about it, but we're really talking about is tribal loyalty. The idea that not only do I connect to this brand, and this is the important part, I have to connect to the brand first at a values level. So now we're moving beyond just was the price right or the experience right. Now it's saying that brand stands for something, and I see my own values reflected in that brand. And so I connected to them. And then I sought out other people who made that same brand connection and choice. And then once I did that, the brand got out of the way a little bit and let us connect together. The most obvious example of a brand who's done this really, really well for a long time is Harley Davidson, with the sort of the writing and the open road culture that they embrace. And that, frankly, their tribe really actually gets together, like on weekends at Harley dealerships, and then they all go, sit in the parking lot with their bikes, and then go riding together. The reason we know this is super powerful is from another little bit of behavioral science. We use a model by an academic named Dr. Paul Lawrence, who used to be with the Harvard Business School, called the 4 drive model. And I talked about these 4 core human drives that essentially you could boil almost all human behavior down to. But one of those drives is called the drive to bond. So it's the drive to connect socially. And there's a mountain of neuroscience data out there that says that when you have experiences that are socially based, where you're connecting with other people and sharing that experience, it literally does something biochemically to the brain different than solitary experiences do. You're more likely to remember that experience, to recall it easily later, and to remember it positively. So that's why when we look at how could brands deliver loyalty in a different way, the idea of really embracing your tribe and helping them connect to each other, there's just so much imperative around that from a psychological standpoint. It's hard to see why anybody would resist trying to do that, except companies don't know how to do it very well.
Yeah. Do you, by chance, off the top of your head, know the other 3 drives? You have me really intrigued right now. That's something I have to go and study Dr. Paul Lawrence. But if you have the drive to bond, do you recall what the other 3 are?
Yeah, there are 4 drives, which is the drive to acquire. So it's like getting stuff and things. Those are really where points-based programs sit. There's the drive to bond, to connect socially. There's the drive to create. So the idea of wanting to add myself into the experience, to create some kind of investment into it. And then, frankly, what Dr. Lawrence's work suggests is the most powerful drive is the drive to defend. So it's the idea that once I have my stuff, my social network, and I have my ideas expressed, I will work really, really hard to hang on to all of that. And the other thing that he points out is some people tend to look at his model and say, well, I'm a drive to bond person. And somebody else says, I'm an acquire person. It really, we all have all 4 of those drives going on at all times, sometimes more dominant than others, but that is essentially how the human brain works. So you really could create experiences that activate all 4 of those, and you probably have a more powerful experience than if you're just working with one.
Well, and from a brand story standpoint, narrative standpoint, to really understand what is driving your audience at that particular time, to know what kind of stories to share with them and then to deliver on. So, for instance, you have the drive to bond. Harley Davidson's a really great example of that. Drive to create, when you mention that, IKEA immediately popped to my mind.
Absolutely.
Because you get a chance to go in and create and literally build some of your furniture. And they say, some cognitive psychologists say there's actually way more value in that transaction because you were physically taking part. What would be an example of drive to defend?
So the airlines use drive to defend very, very well. So if you're in any airline loyalty programs, when you start to get close to the end of the calendar year, you start to begin to calculate: am I going to maintain my status this year or not? Do I have enough points earned or enough flights taken that when that clock rolls over on January 1st, am I still platinum status or whatever status you have? And so if you know a lot of business travelers, you will hear the stories about crazy flights that they booked where they decided instead of flying direct, they had like 4 hops to get where they go because that's what they needed to hit that.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So not probably the way I would want to use Drive to Defend, but it is like a classic example in the loyalty industry of how that's been used very effectively for a long time.
And how about Drive to Acquire? So that's, to me, sounds like pure consumerism. Is that right?
That's
or is
right.
it acquiring something else?
Yeah, it's the one we overuse, frankly, but it's the one, if you're working on points or discounts or price, that's Drive to Acquire.
Okay, I got you. Fascinating. So we've gotten through the 4: inertia, mercenary, which are much more sort of data-driven, logic, rational-driven points, and not a lot of relationship happening there. And then you've got cult, and you've got true loyalty, where relationship is a much more important part of this. Barry, do you guys over there at Maritz, do you have like an infographic or something that shows, is it like a quad split where these all fall in, or something that we could share visually with our listeners in my show notes?
We absolutely do. We have it's basically just a simple 2x2, because as I said, what's important to me in my work is to take what could be very complex ideas and get them down to where they're usable. And so we just basically express this in a 2x2. We'd be really happy to share with the audience.
Yeah.
And I can also share with you some interesting data. We do a study nationally to find out where people sit in these quadrants. And you wouldn't, probably not a surprise when we run the study, we still have most consumers saying that they fall in the mercenary loyalty box. I do want to add just one bit of context to that. After looking at the verbatims from our study, I'm convinced though that that's not consumers saying that the majority of us are just mercenary loyalists and that's all we want. I think that's actually consumers saying that is predominantly all that's being asked for from me by brands. I don't have a lot of brands asking me for my tribal loyalty or my experience-based loyalty. And so I'm giving the loyalty that's being asked for. And so the one thing I want to add to this concept of this model, the reason we call it the multi-loyalty framework, is we're advising brands, don't pick one type of loyalty and just try to do that every day. You're actually going to be a stronger brand if you're activating multiple types of loyalty. So if you think about Apple has a lot of true loyalty there because people love the experience of Apple products. There are also a ton of, Apple fanboys out there. People like me who put an Apple sticker on the back of our car. We've got cult loyalty mixed up into our experience with that brand as well. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. In fact, you're in a better position if you're bringing multiple sort of loyalty stories into that context.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. So let's get to this final thought of tiki bars. You have me really intrigued. What is happening with tiki bars, and how are they the ultimate expression of storytelling in business?
So tiki bars, something that part of American culture. I don't know if people know this. They've been around since post-war World War II era, and they've kind of had ebbed and flowed in their popularity. They are super popular again right now for whatever reason. But when I tell people that I am just a cult loyalist to tiki bars, they're often like, "Oh, well, let's go. I want to see what that fruity drink is like that you must like." I'm like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Tiki bars, if you really understand it and where they came from, are about a story. It is not about what you drink or where it's located or anything else. It's when you step to the door of a tiki bar, when they're done well, you become like the finder of the hidden place. Inside of a tiki bar, the story of every good tiki bar is that it is perpetually dusk in a tiki bar in some place that you can't quite pinpoint where you are or when you are, but there's this exotic experience happening in front of you, and the outside world gets shut out. And so you can find these quirky little places all over the U.S. with different types of stories, I think, going on. But the one that I thought would be great to share with your audience just quickly is there's a tiki bar in San Diego, California, called the Grass Skirt Tiki. And one of the things I do, part of my self-evaluation of tiki bars, is I'm always dragging friends and family. Like, if you don't know tiki, I'm going to make you experience it. And so I took my family to this Grass Skirt Tiki bar. But when we arrived at the Grass Skirt, we immediately realized there was no door to get into the bar. We could hear the music and we could see like the sign, but there was literally absolutely no entrance to the tiki bar. And we walked around and around the building, no way to get in. And after almost giving up, one of us noticed that there was connected to the tiki bar a little Chinese takeout place, like part of the same building, but definitely a different business. And so it occurred to us, like, let's walk over there and see if they know where the door is to the tiki bar. And so we walk in, and there's a guy behind the counter, and he looks up, and we said, hey, we're trying to go to the Grass Skirt here next door, and we cannot find the entrance. Can you point to the entrance? And he had this look on his face like he'd heard this question a million times. And all he did was gesture over his shoulder, like telling us go behind the counter into their kitchen. And what we had to figure out was, after a little exploration, that there was a big silver door to their cooler. Except when you open the door to their cooler, it wasn't the doorway to the cooler. It was the doorway to a secret passage that connected the Chinese takeout place to the Grass Skirt tiki bar next door. But you had to discover that on your own. They didn't tell you that. And when you got down through this dark passage with air blowing on you, you opened up into this glorious, huge tiki bar with colors and lights and sound. But they wanted you to go on an adventure first. They wanted you to discover the secret door and wanted you to hang around long enough to find it. Somebody asked me later, well, that seems kind of crazy. Like, what if people didn't find the secret door and then just left? And I'm like, well, then they didn't belong in the tribe in the first place. So that's why I love tiki bars. And I talk to clients all the time about that. Say, look, if I could work with you to take 5% of that experience at the Grass Skirt Tiki Bar and put it into your airline or into your hotel or into your retail chain, then we've got something really powerful there to pull loyalty from.
Our daughter Corbin lives in North Park over in San Diego. So now I've got a place to take them. I won't even tell them. I said, let's go out for drinks. And they'll say, where are you going? And I said, I don't know. I've heard of this one place. And I'll take them on that excursion, that adventure.
And you're the sage with the secret knowledge in that situation now.
Oh yeah. I'll get major dad cred points for that. Very cool. The next time you're in Phoenix, let me know. And I'm going to take you to the Undertow.
Oh, absolutely. That's one I haven't been to. I know of it, but I haven't. So I will definitely take you up on that.
Yeah. And for you listeners, next time you're in Phoenix, check out the Undertow at SIP. And that's all I'm going to tell you. You've got to figure it out from there. But it is amazing. And the storytelling that goes on in this little place, this little tiki bar, is incredible. And I never put all that together. I always appreciated what they were doing there. But now, Barry, that you're talking about it, I totally get it. Because there was one up in Seattle called the Palm Room where I grew up. And my buddies found it. And then we started going. And when you walked into that tiki room, it has since burned down under suspicious circumstances. You felt like literally you were stepping back in time to like World War II Pearl Harbor, hanging out in a bar. And it was so campy. It was wonderful.
Yeah, you got it. It's about being transported. And that's why those experiences are so incredible sometimes when you go to those places.
So brilliant. So yeah, check out the Undertow at SIP the next time you're in town. Or better yet, I will take you there for one of my favorite drinks. Barry, this has been absolutely fantastic. Where can people learn more about you and your work and put some of these practices to work for them?
Yeah, definitely connect with us at maritzloyalty.com. And I'm also very active on Twitter, just as Barry Kirk, and would love to engage with anybody around these ideas that we talked about today.
And do you have a book coming out anytime soon? Because it sure seems like you're sitting on what would be a gold mine of a book.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you toss around in your head all the time, and it's on my list, but not soon. But I appreciate you suggesting that, because I always need those little nudges to keep heading down that path.
Yeah, really, really great stuff. So thank you so much for taking the time to be on Business of Story.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks.
And I'd like to thank all of you for listening and being a loyal listener to Business of Story. We're growing every month. We are ranked now among the top 10% of listened to, downloaded podcasts in the world. So that's nice. And I really appreciate your loyalty in coming back. And if you like this episode and what Barry had to say, and you've got some colleagues or friends, family members, or whomever that may have small businesses to large brands that could do a better job, as we all can, with our customer loyalty, then feel free to share this episode with them. It's just really, really some terrific understanding, insight, and some good resources that we can all go to use to build our own loyalty for our brand and what we do. And of course, if I can be of service to you, visit me over at businessofstory.com. I've got a ton of tools, tips, techniques free for you to use to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. And until next Monday, when we'll have another incredible story artist on like Barry, please remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.